The piercing wail of Dubai Fire Department sirens shattered the pre-dawn silence in Jumeirah's exclusive Al Safa district at 3:47 a.m. on April 16, 2013. Red and blue emergency lights reflected off the pristine marble facades of multi-million dirham villas as fire trucks converged on a sprawling residence whose upper floor was consumed in violent orange flames. Inside the smoke-filled villa, first responders discovered 2 bodies in the charred remains of what had once been luxurious living quarters, while a third victim, severely burned but alive, was found on the ground floor, her designer nightgown singed and trembling hands betraying the horror she had witnessed. By dawn, headlines would scream across international media. Emirati housewife burns down home, killing husband and Filipina maid-in-love triangle gone wrong. What started as suspicions about morning sickness would end in a deadly inferno that exposed the dark underbelly of Dubai's perfect expatriate life. Hind Al-Mazrouei had been born into privilege in 1971, the daughter of one of Dubai's most prominent merchant families whose trading empire had helped build the Emirates' commercial foundation during the oil boom years. Her childhood in the family's sprawling compound in Old Dubai was filled with private tutors, international travel, and the unspoken expectation that she would marry well and maintain the family's sterling reputation. At the American University of Sharjah in the early 1990s, Hind distinguished herself both academically and socially. She could navigate traditional majlis gatherings with elder relatives and modern business conferences with equal grace. Her marriage to Nasser Al-Mazrouei at 22 in 1993 had been the social event of the season, bringing together 2 of Dubai's most influential families in a lavish ceremony that made society pages across the Gulf. 20 years later, Hind had crafted what appeared to be the perfect expatriate wife's life. As an active member of the Dubai Ladies Club, she organized charity galas raising hundreds of thousands of dirhams for various causes. Her carefully maintained photo albums showcased designer shopping trips to London, afternoon gatherings at the newly opened Atlantis Resort, and weekend getaways to their Fujairah beach house. Their Al Safa villa, purchased for AED 6 million during Dubai's pre-recession boom, featured 6 bedrooms, a tennis court, an infinity pool overlooking Dubai's rapidly transforming skyline. Yet beneath the glossy surface, cracks had begun to appear. After 20 years of marriage, the couple remained childless despite numerous fertility treatments at Dubai's most exclusive clinics. The monthly disappointments had taken their toll on Hind's perfectionist nature, and friends noticed she'd become increasingly controlling about household management, social appearances, and maintaining their reputation in Dubai's tight-knit elite circles. Nasser Al-Mazrouei cut an impressive figure in Dubai's business community at 45. As owner of Al-Mazrouei Construction, he had secured lucrative government contracts for major infrastructure projects, including sections of the Dubai Marina development and several high-rise projects in Business Bay. His net worth exceeded AED 40 million, spread across real estate investments and business ventures, riding the wave of Dubai's construction boom. To his business associates at the Emirates Golf Club, Nasser appeared to be living the dream: successful company, beautiful wife, luxury lifestyle including a growing collection of luxury cars and regular European holidays. However, those closest to the couple had begun noticing subtle changes. Nasser's business trips had become more frequent and longer, often extending planned 2-day meetings into week-long absences. His once attentive demeanor toward Hind had grown distant, and their famous dinner parties had become less frequent. When pressed about his increasing absences, Nasser would cite expanding business opportunities and the demands of Dubai's booming construction market. Into this rarefied world came Clarisse Santos, a 24-year-old nursing graduate from Cebu in the Philippines. Like thousands of her compatriots, Clarisse had come to Dubai through a recruitment agency in 2012, drawn by the promise of earning more in 2 years than she could make in a decade back home. Her previous employment with another prominent Emirati family had ended amicably, with glowing references praising her discretion, work ethic, and ability to seamlessly integrate into a traditional household. Clarisse's small room on the villa's upper floor became her entire world, a space barely larger than a hotel room, furnished with a single bed, small closet, and shared bathroom facilities. Despite her nursing background, she had accepted domestic work as the fastest path to her ultimate goal: saving enough money to return to the Philippines and open a small clinic in her hometown. The isolation was perhaps the hardest part. Dubai's kafala sponsorship system meant Clarisse couldn't change employers without permission, couldn't travel freely, and had limited legal protections. Her social life was restricted to occasional Skype calls with family and brief conversations with other domestic workers during shopping trips to Dubai Mall. This complex web existed within Dubai's intricate social hierarchy, where domestic workers from the Philippines, Indonesia, and Sri Lanka formed an invisible backbone supporting expatriate luxury lifestyles. In neighborhoods like Safa, domestic workers served as status symbols reflecting their employers' wealth during Dubai's boom years. Yet this system created vulnerabilities, isolated workers dependent on employers for legal status, often lacking recourse when boundaries were crossed. As 2013 began, the Al-Mazrouei household appeared to maintain perfect order. Neighbors saw familiar patterns of successful expatriate life. Luxury cars departing each morning, regular entertaining, and quiet efficiency of well-managed domestic staff. The marble facade gleamed in Dubai's relentless sunshine, reflecting prosperity and stability in a city recovering from the 2008 financial crisis, but showing renewed growth signs. But behind closed doors, subtle changes were beginning to emerge, changes that would ultimately lead to a deadly confrontation, exposing not just personal betrayals, but systemic vulnerabilities in Dubai's complex social order. The perfect life Hind had spent 20 years building was about to unravel in the most spectacular and tragic way imaginable. March 2013 brought Dubai's brief spring season, when the oppressive summer heat temporarily retreated and the city's elite emerged for outdoor gatherings and extended social events. It was during this time that Hind Al-Mazrouei first noticed the subtle changes in her household's carefully orchestrated rhythm. The signs were so small initially that she questioned her own observations. A fleeting moment of nausea when Clarisse served breakfast, the way the young Filipina suddenly avoided the strong aroma of Arabic coffee that had never bothered her before. At first, Hind attributed these changes to the seasonal shift or perhaps homesickness affecting their domestic help. But as days passed, the signs became impossible to ignore. Clarisse, who had always maintained her petite figure through careful eating habits, began choosing looser traditional Filipino dresses instead of her usual fitted uniforms. Her energy levels, once consistent throughout long working days, now seemed to fluctuate dramatically. Bursts of activity followed by periods where she would sit heavily in kitchen chairs, her hand unconsciously resting on her stomach. The morning routine that had run like clockwork for months began experiencing small disruptions. Clarisse would excuse herself during breakfast preparation, rushing to the guest bathroom with barely concealed urgency. When questioned, she would blame something she ate or claim the cleaning products were making her feel dizzy. Hind, with her business background and attention to detail, began mentally cataloging these incidents with growing unease. More troubling was Nasser's increasingly protective behavior toward their domestic help. The man who had barely acknowledged Clarisse's presence beyond basic instructions now inquired about her comfort, suggested she rest when she appeared tired, and even insisted on driving her to medical appointments himself, a task typically delegated to other household staff or taxi services. When Hind questioned this unusual consideration, Nasser's responses carried a defensive edge that was entirely out of character. Family dinners, once filled with discussion about business developments and social plans, became exercises in awkward silence. Nasser would steal glances toward the kitchen where Clarisse worked, while Hind found herself analyzing every interaction, every shared look, every subtle change in household dynamics. Their friends at weekly gatherings began commenting on the tension, asking if everything was well at home with characteristic diplomatic vagueness that marked Dubai's expatriate social circles. The investigation began accidentally when Hind noticed unexplained numbers on their shared mobile phone bill in early April. The calls, made during afternoon hours when she assumed Nasser was in meetings, lasted for extended periods and were directed to numbers she didn't recognize. Her banking background made her naturally analytical about financial discrepancies, and she began systematically examining their household accounts with forensic precision. Hidden in Clarisse's small upper-floor room, beneath carefully folded traditional Filipino dresses, Hind discovered a pregnancy test still in its packaging. The discovery hit her like a physical blow, confirming suspicions she had desperately hoped were unfounded. Her hands shook as she photographed the evidence before carefully replacing it exactly as found, her mind racing through implications and possibilities. Nasser's business schedule, once predictable and transparent, had become increasingly erratic. Meetings that should have ended by mid-afternoon extended well into evening hours. His explanations about construction site visits and client dinners seemed plausible until Hind began cross-referencing his stated appointments with publicly available information about his company's projects. The inconsistencies were subtle but undeniable. Other household staff began exhibiting uncomfortable behaviors when questioned about daily routines. The gardener avoided eye contact when discussing Nasser's comings and goings. The part-time cook made excuses to leave early when both Nasser and Clarisse were present. Even their longtime driver seemed nervous when asked about recent transportation requests, suggesting an awareness of situations that made him uncomfortable. Financial irregularities emerged through Hind's meticulous examination of bank statements. Cash withdrawals in amounts unusual for Nasser's typical spending patterns appeared alongside charges at medical facilities she didn't recognize. Gift purchases at jewelry stores that never materialized as presents for her raised additional questions about their intended recipients. Clarisse's limited social media presence, usually filled with photos sent to family in the Philippines, had become noticeably sparse, with mood changes evident in her infrequent posts. The cultural pressures weighing on Hind intensified as her suspicions solidified. Her family's prominence in Dubai's business community meant any scandal would reverberate far beyond their personal lives. The Al-Mazrouei name carried weight in government circles, banking relationships, and social hierarchies that had taken generations to establish. A marital crisis involving domestic staff would not only destroy her personal happiness but potentially damage business relationships and family honor in ways that could affect multiple generations. Economic implications loomed large as Hind contemplated potential outcomes. Their substantial assets, built over 20 years of marriage, would face complex division procedures under UAE law. Nasser's business relationships, many built on personal trust and family connections, could suffer irreparable damage if their private problems became public knowledge. The construction industry in Dubai operated on reputation and family connections, making personal scandals potentially devastating for business prospects. Extended family dynamics added another layer of complexity. Both sets of parents had invested significant emotional and financial capital in their marriage's success. In-laws' expectations and generational differences regarding how such matters should be handled created pressure to maintain appearances regardless of personal cost. As April progressed, Hind began planning a confrontation with meticulous care. She chose timing when other household staff would be absent, ensuring privacy for what she knew would be a life-altering conversation. The villa's traditional majlis, with its Arabian architectural elements and family photographs spanning decades, seemed the appropriate setting for addressing matters that touched the core of their cultural and personal values. Yet even as she prepared emotionally for answers she dreaded receiving, Hind understood the profound power imbalances that made this situation so complex. Clarisse's vulnerability as a foreign domestic worker created legal and social dynamics that went far beyond simple personal betrayal, encompassing systemic issues that would complicate any resolution. The perfect facade they had maintained for 20 years was beginning to crumble, and Hind sensed that whatever truth emerged from her planned confrontation would forever change not just her marriage, but the lives of everyone touched by their carefully constructed Dubai dream. The confrontation came on a suffocating April afternoon when Dubai's heat had already begun its relentless climb towards summer intensity. Hind had carefully orchestrated the timing. The gardener was off duty, the part-time cook had finished her morning shift, and Nasser was supposedly attending a contractor's meeting in Business Bay. The villa's kitchen, with its floor-to-ceiling windows facing the garden, provided natural lighting that seemed almost theatrical as Hind found Clarisse preparing ingredients for the evening meal. "We need to talk," Hind said quietly in English, closing the kitchen door behind her. The sound seemed to echo in the marble-tiled space, and she watched Clarisse's shoulders tense immediately. The young woman continued chopping vegetables with mechanical precision, her knuckles white against the knife handle. "Yes, ma'am," Clarisse replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The formal distance she maintained even after months of working together suddenly felt charged with unspoken tension. Hind's direct questioning began methodically, each question designed to peel away layers of carefully constructed deception. "The pregnancy test in your room," she stated simply. "When were you planning to tell me?" The knife slipped from Clarisse's hands, clattering against the granite countertop as her composure finally cracked. For 20 minutes, Clarisse maintained her denials through increasingly desperate explanations. The test belonged to a friend. She was holding it for someone else. She didn't know what Hind was talking about. But as Hind presented piece after piece of evidence, the phone records, the medical appointments, the changed behavior patterns, Clarisse's resistance crumbled like sand in Dubai's desert winds. The breaking point came when tears began streaming down Clarisse's face, and the truth spilled out in broken English mixed with Tagalog phrases she whispered to herself like prayers. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I never wanted this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." Her hands moved protectively to her still flat stomach as she admitted what Hind had already suspected, but desperately hoped wasn't true. The detailed revelation that followed shattered any remaining illusions about her marriage. The affair had been ongoing for 6 months, beginning during the period when Hind's mother had fallen seriously ill, and she had spent weeks traveling between Dubai and London for medical treatments. Nasser had not only pursued Clarisse during her vulnerability and isolation, but had made promises that painted their relationship as more than a casual betrayal. "He said he loves me," Clarisse sobbed, her words barely comprehensible through her tears. "He said we would move to Abu Dhabi, that he would take care of me and the baby. He said he would marry me properly, that you would understand eventually." The naive hope in her voice made Hind's stomach turn as she realized the depth of manipulation involved. Clarisse's perspective emerged through her tearful confession, a complex mixture of genuine emotional attachment and economic desperation. She spoke of Nasser's kindness during her lonely evenings, his promises of security for her family back in the Philippines, and his assurances that their relationship was built on love rather than exploitation. Yet underneath her words, Hind could hear the fundamental vulnerability of a young woman far from home, dependent on her employers for everything from legal status to basic survival. The pregnancy details cut deepest of all. 3 months along, carefully planned together with Nasser, discussed in whispered conversations during Hind's absences. While Hind had been undergoing another round of painful fertility treatments, spending thousands of dirhams on procedures that continued to fail, her husband had been creating the family she desperately wanted with their domestic help. Nasser's financial promises became clear as Clarisse revealed secret bank accounts he had opened, property viewings in Abu Dhabi they had attended together, and his assurances that money would never be a concern for their new family. The systematic planning behind the betrayal made it feel less like an affair and more like the methodical dismantling of her entire life. Hind's reaction evolved through distinct phases as the full scope of the deception became clear. Initial disbelief gave way to a growing rage that seemed to physically heat the air around her. The feeling of betrayal was so profound it manifested physically. Her hands shook uncontrollably, her vision seemed to narrow, and she found herself gripping the kitchen counter for support as waves of nausea washed over her. The power dynamics between employer and employee shifted dramatically as truth replaced secrecy. Clarisse, no longer the submissive domestic worker, became a woman fighting for her future and that of her unborn child. Hind, stripped of her illusions about marital happiness, found herself facing an adversary she had never imagined. Someone who had been living in her home, eating her food, and systematically destroying her life from within. The emotional complexity of the situation threatened to overwhelm Hind's ability to process what she was hearing. Part of her felt genuine sympathy for Clarisse's vulnerability and exploitation, recognizing that the power imbalances inherent in their relationship made true consent questionable. Yet this sympathy warred with a fury so intense it frightened her. Rage at being betrayed by the two people she had trusted most in her daily life. The conversation revealed the household dynamics that had enabled such elaborate deception. Secret signals between Nasser and Clarisse, carefully timed encounters when Hind was absent, and the complicity of other staff members who had chosen silence over loyalty to their primary employer. The villa that had been her sanctuary now felt contaminated by months of lies and betrayal. As the afternoon sun began to set, casting long shadows across the kitchen where her world had just collapsed, Hind realized that the perfect life she had spent 20 years building was built on foundations far more fragile than she had ever imagined. The revelation had transformed not just her understanding of her marriage, but her entire sense of identity and place in Dubai's complex social hierarchy. The pregnancy that should have brought joy had instead delivered the most devastating betrayal imaginable, and as Clarisse's sobs echoed through the marble-walled kitchen, Hind felt something dark and irreversible beginning to take shape in her mind. April 15, 2013, began like countless other evenings in the Al-Mazrouei household. Dubai's spring weather had settled into its brief comfortable phase before the crushing summer heat arrived, and a gentle breeze moved through the villa's carefully tended gardens. The household routine proceeded with mechanical normalcy. Dinner served precisely at 7, Arabic news programs playing softly on the plasma television, and the familiar sounds of evening preparations as staff completed their final duties before retiring to their quarters. Hind observed everything with heightened awareness, her senses sharpened by the devastating revelations of the afternoon. She watched Nasser push food around his plate, seemingly distracted, occasionally glancing toward the kitchen where Clarisse was cleaning dishes. Their subtle interactions had taken on sinister meaning. A brief eye contact when he handed her his plate, the way he lingered near the kitchen doorway, the almost imperceptible nod she gave him before disappearing upstairs to her room. At 10:30 p.m., as Nasser settled into his study to review construction contracts, Hind excused herself to check on household security, a routine she had performed countless times before. But tonight, as she moved through the villa's familiar corridors, her mind was calculating something entirely different. The gasoline stored in their garage for the backup generator suddenly took on new significance in her methodical planning. The final trigger came just after 11 p.m. when Hind overheard whispered voices from the upper floor. Standing at the bottom of the marble staircase, she caught fragments of conversation between Nasser and Clarisse, discussions about apartment viewings in Abu Dhabi, baby names, and timeline for starting fresh. The casual intimacy in their voices, the shared future they were planning while she slept unknowingly below, crystallized her decision into something cold and irreversible. Her mental preparation took on an almost ritual quality as midnight approached. 20 years of marriage, 2 decades of building a life together, reduced to this moment of absolute betrayal. Her decision felt less like choice and more like inevitable consequence, the only response that matched the magnitude of their deception. She changed from her silk nightgown into dark cotton clothing, thinking practically about what would come after. At 2:47 a.m., according to security camera timestamps that would later become crucial evidence, Hind began her methodical movement through the villa. Her intimate knowledge of every creaking floorboard, every squeaky hinge, allowed her to navigate in complete silence. The gasoline, stored in a 5-liter container near their Range Rover, felt heavier than expected as she carried it upstairs toward Clarisse's quarters. The upper floor of their villa had always been designed for privacy, separate from the main family areas, accessible through a narrow stairway, with Clarisse's room positioned at the far end of a corridor lined with storage closets. The architectural layout that had once provided discretion for domestic staff now served Hind's darker purpose perfectly. Standing outside Clarisse's door, Hind could hear the soft breathing of sleep from within. The lock was a simple interior mechanism, easily secured from the outside with a chair wedged under the handle, a temporary barrier that would buy her the time she needed. The ventilation system, designed to provide air circulation in Dubai's climate, became her delivery method as she carefully poured gasoline through the metal grates. The chemical smell filled the narrow corridor as she emptied the container, ensuring even distribution throughout the small room. Her movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial, as she prepared to destroy not just Clarisse, but the future they had planned together. In her mind, this wasn't murder. It was erasure, removing the contamination that had infected her perfect life. The single match struck against the stone wall created a brief flare of light before Hind dropped it through the ventilation grate. The ignition was immediate and violent, gasoline vapors exploding in a fireball that shattered the room's small window and sent flames racing along wooden ceiling beams faster than she had anticipated. Her planned escape route toward the main staircase became urgent as fire spread beyond the small room, consuming traditional Arabic architectural elements and racing through the upper floor's interconnected spaces. The villa's design, with its decorative wooden accents and flowing layout, became a highway for flames that reached toward Nasser's bedroom with terrifying speed. Nasser's awakening came through smoke alarms piercing the night air at 3:02 a.m. His immediate disorientation gave way to panic as he realized the upper floor was engulfed in flames. Despite the obvious danger, his first instinct was to reach Clarisse, a response that revealed the depth of his emotional attachment even in life-threatening circumstances. The locked door and intense heat created insurmountable obstacles as Nasser tried desperately to reach the source of the fire. Smoke inhalation began affecting his coordination and judgment as he struggled with the makeshift barricade Hind had created. His final moments were spent not fleeing to safety, but attempting to save the woman carrying his child. Dubai Fire Department's response time of 13 minutes was considered excellent by international standards, but the villa's upper floor was already lost when professional firefighters arrived. Neighbors' emergency calls had brought multiple units, their red lights reflecting off marble facades throughout Safa as the community watched one of their own burn. Rescue operations revealed the full scope of the tragedy. Nasser was found collapsed near Clarisse's door, overcome by smoke inhalation. Clarisse herself was discovered unconscious in her room, severely burned but still alive. Hind was located on the ground floor, suffering minor burns and apparent shock, her carefully planned survival a stark contrast to the devastation above. The immediate aftermath transformed their quiet neighborhood into a crime scene. Dubai Police Criminal Investigation Department sealed the property as forensic specialists began collecting evidence of what appeared to be deliberate arson. The distinctive gasoline odor and burn patterns told a story that contradicted any possibility of accidental fire. Media attention was swift and intense, with local news outlets reporting the dramatic fire and international coverage focusing on the cultural implications of the tragedy. The story had everything that captured global attention: wealth, betrayal, domestic workers' rights, and deadly consequences in Dubai's expatriate community. As dawn broke over the charred remains of their villa, the perfect facade that had defined the Al-Mazrouei family for 20 years lay in ruins. The fire had consumed more than just a building. It had destroyed lives, exposed systemic vulnerabilities, and created ripple effects that would resonate through Dubai's complex social hierarchy for years to come. The investigation was just beginning, but the truth was already written in gasoline residue and burn patterns that would soon reveal the calculated nature of a betrayed wife's ultimate revenge. The investigation unfolded with methodical precision as Dubai Police's Criminal Investigation Department assembled their case against Hind Al-Mazrouei. Captain Ahmed Al-Suwaidi, head of the arson unit, led a team of forensic specialists who found gasoline residue concentrated throughout Clarisse's room and distinctive accelerant burn patterns that eliminated any possibility of accidental fire. Security camera footage from neighboring villas captured Hind's movements throughout the night, creating an irrefutable timeline of premeditation that would become the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Digital analysis revealed the depth of planning behind her actions. Phone records showed Hind had researched fire behavior and accelerants in the weeks following her discovery of the affair, including multiple searches for gasoline ignition patterns and smoke inhalation effects. Financial transactions included cash purchases of additional gasoline containers from different service stations across Dubai, suggesting she had considered multiple scenarios before settling on her final plan. Her browsing history revealed disturbing searches about fire escape routes and burn treatment facilities. Witness testimonies painted a picture of a woman consumed by betrayal and methodically planning her revenge. The villa's part-time cook, Clarisse Santos, revealed that Hind had questioned her extensively about Nasser and Clarisse's interactions during the weeks preceding the fire. Business associates described Nasser's recent distraction and frequent mentions of future changes in his personal life that now took on sinister meaning. Neighbors reported seeing Hind making unusual nighttime visits to their garage in the days before the tragedy. Medical examinations provided crucial evidence about the victim's final moments. Nasser died on April 17, 2013, never regaining consciousness after smoke inhalation caused cardiac arrest. The autopsy revealed he had inhaled superheated gases while attempting to reach Clarisse's room, confirming witness accounts of his desperate rescue attempts. His construction company, Al-Mazrouei Construction, collapsed within months as government contracts were cancelled and business relationships dissolved in the scandal's aftermath. The family name that had taken generations to build in Dubai's commercial circles was destroyed overnight. Clarisse Santos fought for her life for 6 agonizing days at Dubai Hospital's burn unit, before succumbing to severe burns covering 60% of her body and respiratory complications on April 23, 2013. Her death devastated her family in Cebu, who had depended on her monthly remittances for basic survival. The Philippines embassy coordinated her body's repatriation, but the funeral costs bankrupted her relatives who had borrowed money hoping for her eventual return with substantial savings. The loss of her unborn child added another layer of tragedy to legal proceedings, as UAE law treated fetal death as an additional criminal charge. Hind's trial began 6 months later at Dubai Criminal Court, drawing international media attention to domestic worker rights in the Gulf region. The courtroom was packed daily with journalists, human rights observers, and members of both the Emirati and Filipino communities. High-profile Emirati defense attorneys led by Khalid Al-Mazrouei argued temporary insanity, claiming the discovery of her husband's affair and Clarisse's pregnancy had triggered a psychological breakdown that rendered her incapable of rational decision-making. The prosecution, headed by Chief Prosecutor Fatima Al-Zahra, presented overwhelming evidence of premeditation. The systematic investigation of the affair, the careful planning of the fire, and the calculated timing of her actions. They portrayed Hind not as a victim of betrayal, but as a calculating killer who had chosen murder over legal remedies available through Dubai's family courts. Security footage, financial records, and digital evidence created an unshakable foundation for their case. The confession moment came during her 3rd day of testimony when sustained questioning broke through her composed exterior. "I didn't want to kill him," she sobbed before the packed courtroom, her voice barely audible above the sudden silence. "I just wanted to watch him lose her the way I lost everything." The statement revealed the revenge motive that had driven her actions, not just eliminating Clarisse, but forcing Nasser to suffer the loss of someone he loved before dying himself. Expert psychiatric testimony debated whether extreme emotional distress could excuse premeditated murder, while cultural experts explained the particular shame and humiliation Hind faced in Dubai's traditional society. Dr. Sarah Al-Kabi, a prominent forensic psychiatrist, testified that Hind suffered from complex trauma but remained legally competent during the planning and execution of her crimes. Judge Muhammad Al-Rashid ultimately found that while her emotional state was a mitigating factor, the systematic planning and innocent lives lost demanded severe consequences. Hind received a 20-year sentence with possibility of parole after 15 years, contingent on completing mental health treatment and rehabilitation programs. The verdict satisfied neither side completely but reflected the complex cultural and legal considerations involved in the case. The tragedy catalyzed significant reforms in UAE domestic worker protections. New regulations required regular welfare checks, improved complaint mechanisms, and stricter oversight of employer-employee relationships. The kafala sponsorship system underwent modifications allowing workers greater mobility and legal protections, while employment agencies faced enhanced screening requirements. 5 years later, measurable improvements in domestic worker conditions had emerged from the ashes of the Al-Mazrouei villa. Clarisse Santos became a symbol for worker rights advocacy, with educational programs bearing her name across the Philippines and UAE. The scholarship fund established in her memory had supported dozens of young nurses pursuing education and professional development. Hind's case established legal precedents for handling domestic violence cases involving cultural complexities, while ongoing monitoring by international human rights organizations ensured continued attention to systemic issues. The perfect facade of expatriate life in Dubai had been forever altered, replaced by greater awareness of the human costs hidden behind marble walls and luxury lifestyles.